The moment I laid eyes on Alex, I knew I was in trouble. He was the new guy at work, all charm and dazzling smiles, slipping into my life like a secret kept in the dark. We started seeing each other, meeting up at this swanky downtown hotel, our little bubble away from reality. I told Mark, my husband, I was buried in work, slaving away on projects until late. A lie that tasted bitter on my tongue, but I cutinized its flavor all too well. One day, Mark stumbled upon a hotel receipt in my purse. His brows furrowed, holding it up like a piece of damning evidence. "What's this?" he asked, voice laced with confusion more than anger. I scrambled for an explanation. "Oh, that? It's from a client meeting. Had to book a room for a presentation." The lie slipped out smoother than I expected, but the guilt? It gnawed at me, a relentless reminder of the web I was weaving. To keep my affair with Alex afloat, I bought a second phone. It felt like something out of a spy movie, sneaking around, hiding it in our home office's deepest drawer. Just in case, I told myself, ignoring the nagging feeling that I was digging my grave deeper with each text, each secret rendezvous. Then came the night Mark planned a surprise dinner. Our dining room was set, candles lit, his attempt at rekindling whatever spark we had left. But Alex's text lit up my secret phone, a beacon of temptation. "Can't miss this," I muttered, crafting another lie about a sudden work crisis. Mark's face fell as I bailed on him, the disappointment etched deep. I hated myself for it, but the thrill, the sheer adrenaline rush of sneaking around, was intoxicating. Mark's trust in me started to crumble, his suspicions growing with every work emergency, I claimed. One night, he decided to follow me. I didn't know then, but that decision would change everything. He caught me red-handed, stepping out of the hotel with Alex, laughter spilling into the night. Confronted later, with nowhere to hide, I pleaded for forgiveness, tears streaming, voice trembling. But Mark, he just stood there, silent, his eyes a mirror of the heartbreak I caused. The next day, I found a GPS tracker tucked away in my car. A cold realization washed over me, Mark knew. He knew and yet said nothing. Instead, he chose silence, letting the tracker speak volumes of the trust we lost. The evidence was there, black and white, a trail of lies leading straight back to me. Every step I took from then on felt heavy, laden with the weight of my betrayal. Mark's silent disappointment was a constant shadow, a reminder of the chaos I'd invited into our lives. The thrill of the affair with Alex had turned sour, the secrecy once exciting now a prison of my own making. The realization hit me hard. I was the architect of my own downfall, trapped in a web spun from lies and deceit. It was just a regular Tuesday, nothing out of the ordinary except for the fact that my world was slowly crumbling. There I was, vacuuming the car, when my hand brushed against something odd under the driver's seat. A GPS tracker, sleek and silent, a silent sentinel of my betrayals. My heart sank. Mark knew. He knew about Alex and me, and this tiny device was his silent scream of betrayal. Panic set in, a wild, thrashing thing. I had to end it with Alex, had to somehow salvage the wreckage of my marriage. But when I told Alex it was over, his reaction was a cold bucket of water to my face. "End it? You think you can just walk away?" His voice was icy, a threat veiled in each syllable. "I'll tell Mark everything, see how you like it then." The words hung between us, a guillotine ready to drop. The next day, while at work, my phone buzzed with an anonymous email. Pictures attached showed Mark confronting Alex outside his office building, faces tense, a physical standoff of words I could only imagine. My heart raced. Mark had stepped into the ring, silent no more. He was fighting back in a way I never anticipated, a protector even in his pain. Feeling like the walls were closing in, I needed Mark, needed to explain, to apologize, to do something. But he was gone, off on a solo trip to clear his head, the chasm between us now a gaping maw. The house felt empty, echoes of our happier times mocking me from the corners. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, I found the cameras. Hidden in the living room, one in the bedroom, their lenses cold and unblinking. Mark had been watching me, every move scrutinized, nothing missed. The betrayal I felt was a strange mirror to my own, a reflection of deceit. I called him, heart in my throat, anger and guilt warring within me. The cameras, Mark, really? My voice was sharp, defensive, yet breaking. There was a heavy pause before he spoke. It was the only way I could know for sure. The only way I could trust you again. His voice was a mix of resignation and resolve, a man pushed to the brink. The conversation that followed was a blend of tears, accusations, and the barest glimmers of understanding. Mark's silent war had been one of preservation, not just punishment. He needed to see for himself, to grasp the full scope of my betrayal before he could even begin to think about forgiveness or the future. As I hung up the phone, the weight of my actions sat heavily on my shoulders. Mark's trip was a quest for peace, but for me, it was a sentence to face the chaos I'd created. Alone in our house, surrounded by the invisible eyes of the cameras, I realized the depth of my folly. Mark's love had been a constant, and I'd traded it for fleeting moments of excitement. The days stretched on, Mark's absence a gaping hole in my existence. I moved through our home like a ghost, haunted by the evidence of my actions and his responses. The GPS tracker, the confrontation, the cameras, they were all pieces of a puzzle I'd carelessly thrown on the floor, expecting someone else to pick up. But as the sun set each day, casting long shadows across the rooms we'd shared, the reality of my situation became clearer. I had to face the consequences of my actions, had to find a way to make amends, if not for Mark, then for the person I once was and hoped to be again. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with hard truths and the possibility of forgiveness, but it was a road I knew I had to take. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button, it really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. In a last-ditch effort to salvage what was left of my marriage, I cut all ties with Alex. It felt like ripping off a part of me, but the stakes were too high. I changed my number, deleted my secret email account, and blocked him on all fronts. This has to work, I whispered to myself, clinging to a sliver of hope. But Alex didn't take the hint. One evening, he showed up at our front door, furious and loud, demanding answers. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his anger piercing the calm of our neighborhood. The neighbors peeked through curtains, whispers floating in the air, further smearing my already tarnished image. Then, in what felt like a cruel twist of fate, Mark came back home unexpectedly. His timing couldn't have been worse. He walked up to find Alex and me in a heated argument right at his doorstep. The look on his face, a mix of betrayal and heartbreak, was more than I could bear. "Mark, please, let me explain," I pleaded, reaching out to him. But he just shook his head, stepping around us without a word, the finality in his silence cutting deeper than any argument. After that day, things spiraled quickly. Mark, once the man I thought I knew inside and out, became a stranger, moving with calculated precision. He hired a private investigator, someone who shadowed my every move, documenting interactions that no longer existed. It felt like I was living in a bad spy movie, except the consequences were all too real. A few days later, the inevitable happened. A legal notice arrived, crisp and formal, the words, "Intention to file for divorce citing infidelity," standing out like a scarlet letter. My hands trembled as I read it, the reality of my choices crashing down on me. This was happening. Mark was moving forward with the divorce. Desperate for any form of support, I reached out to Mark's family. Maybe they could talk some sense into him, maybe they could help us mend what was broken. But the door was shut in my face, both literally and metaphorically. "We stand by Mark," his sister coldly informed me over the phone, her voice devoid of the warmth I had known for years. "You've caused enough damage." The finality in her tone left no room for argument. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in what felt like forever. My actions had not only destroyed my marriage but had alienated me from a family I once considered my own. The weight of my decisions, the sheer magnitude of the mess I had created, was suffocating. I had hoped for a sliver of understanding, a chance to explain, to make things right. But it was clear now, I was the only one fighting for a cause already lost. Night after night, I lay awake, replaying everything in my head. How did I get here? Was there ever a moment I could have turned back, made a different choice? The questions haunted me, a relentless tide of what-ifs and if-onlys. But deep down, I knew. I had stepped onto this path myself, and now, I had to face the journey alone. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with the consequences of my actions and the reality of a future I never imagined, a future without Mark. The day Alex decided to unleash his wrath was the day any hope of fixing things with Mark evaporated. I woke up to a barrage of notifications, all from Mark, each one a screenshot of messages and photos Alex had sent him. My heart sank to my stomach, it was all out there, raw and undeniable. Alex's parting gift was a nuclear bomb, and it left nothing but scorched earth in its wake. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Mark didn't confront me this time, he didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, a cold, impenetrable wall that I couldn't hope to breach. Days blurred into one another, each passing moment stretching into an eternity of waiting for something, anything, to change. But change did come, just not the kind I'd hoped for. Coming home from work one evening, I was met with the most unexpected sight, a for sale sign planted firmly in front of our house. My house. Our home. Confusion spiraled into panic as I fumbled with my keys, my mind racing with questions. Inside, I found my answer in the form of boxes, my belongings packed up, an impersonal note from Mark lying on top. "I can't do this anymore," it read. "It's over." Just like that, the life we built together was dismantled, piece by piece. The small apartment I moved into felt like a universe away from the life I once knew. It was quiet, too quiet, the silence a stark reminder of the isolation that had become my reality. Friends, or those I once considered friends, sided with Mark, leaving me adrift in a sea of whispers and judgment. The social circle that had once embraced me now seemed like an exclusive club where I was no longer welcome. The demands came next, formal and unforgiving. Mark's lawyer, a voice of cold legality, informed me that I was to return the gifts Mark had given me over the years. Each item, once a symbol of love and affection, was now reduced to a transaction, a debt to be repaid. It was humiliating, a stripping away of memories and moments, leaving me with nothing but the bare bones of a life I scarcely recognize. In a moment of desperation, I wrote Mark a letter. It was everything I couldn't say out loud, every apology, every plea for understanding, poured onto paper. I mailed it, a tiny vessel of hope adrift in a stormy sea, praying it would reach him, touch him, bring him back to me. But the silence that followed was deafening, a clear message that my words, my regrets, were too little, too late. The final nail in the coffin was hearing about Mark's new partner. "She's nothing like you," a mutual friend let slip, a comment that stung more than I cared to admit. It was confirmation of what I already knew, Mark had moved on, his life now a chapter in which I had no part. The realization that I was the architect of my own misery was a bitter pill, one that I swallowed every day, wondering how things might have been different if I had chosen another path. Each event, from Alex's revenge to Mark's silent departure, from the isolation to the legal demands, was a lesson in consequences. The small apartment became my world, a far cry from the life I once led, a daily reminder of the cost of my choices. The letter that went unanswered, the news of Mark's new life, were the final pieces of a puzzle I wished I'd never completed. It was a stark, unyielding reality that I was left to navigate alone, a journey of reflection and regret in the shadow of a love lost. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Alex decided to take his frustration out on me in the most juvenile way possible, by spreading rumors at work. It was like high school all over again, but with higher stakes. Whispered conversations would fall silent as I walked by, and I could feel the weight of every judgmental stare. My workplace, once a refuge, had become a battleground. The stress was unbearable. My work, which I had always prided myself on, began to suffer. Deadlines slipped through my fingers like sand, and my presentations lost their usual punch. It wasn't long before my boss called me in for a chat, a euphemism for what would be a demotion. "We need you at your best, and right now, you're far from it," he said, not unkindly, but the disappointment was clear. That meeting was a blow not just to my ego, but to my financial stability. With a smaller paycheck, everything from rent to groceries became a calculus of necessity. As if to add insult to injury, Mark's lawyer chose my workplace to serve me the divorce papers. It was a spectacle straight out of a daytime drama, me, standing there, papers in hand, as colleagues pretended not to watch. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cloak of shame that I couldn't shrug off. The quick proceedings that followed were a blur, Mark's meticulous documentation painting me into a corner from which there was no escape. The settlement was a joke, leaving me teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Starting over was a phrase easier said than done. The stigma of my actions clung to me like a second skin, making even the simplest interactions fraught with judgment. Dating was out of the question. Who would want the woman vilified across social media? My career, once on an upward trajectory, seemed stuck in neutral, my demotion a scarlet letter I couldn't hide. And then, Mark's coup de grace, a blog post detailing the sordid saga of our marriage's end. He didn't have to name me for everyone to know who he was talking about. The blog went viral overnight, a sensation fueled by schadenfreude and the insatiable appetite for drama. Comments ranged from sympathetic to outright vitriolic, but each one was a needle in my already bruised heart. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, not with words of comfort, but to express their disappointment and distance themselves from the scandal. The irony wasn't lost on me. In seeking happiness, I had become the architect of my own misery, dismantling my life piece by piece until there was nothing left but rubble. The blog, those digital words etched in the annals of the internet, was a monument to my folly, a beacon for judgment and a barrier to any semblance of a normal life. Every day was a battle, a struggle to find some shred of dignity in the wreckage. I clung to my job like a lifeline, the only semblance of normalcy in a life that had gone off the rails. The apartment that had once seemed so cold and unwelcoming now felt like a sanctuary, the only place where the whispers couldn't reach me. But even there, in the quiet moments before sleep, the reality of my situation would sink in. Alone, adrift, and vilified, I was a pariah in a world I once thought I understood. Mark's final act of revenge had been a masterstroke, ensuring that my fall from grace would be a spectacle for all to see. And as I lay there in the dark, the glow of my phone screen a harsh reminder of the public spectacle my life had become. I couldn't help but wonder if redemption was even possible, or if the shadows cast by my actions would stretch on indefinitely, a perpetual twilight from which there was no escape. In a last, desperate attempt to the unbridgeable gap between us, I reached out to Mark. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, each ring echoing like a countdown to my final verdict. But all I was met with was the cold, indifferent silence of an unanswered call. It was his unspoken decree, our chapter was closed, permanently. That silence was louder, more devastating than any words of rejection could ever be. Sitting alone in the dim light of my cramped apartment, the realization hit me like a tidal wave. Mark hadn't just walked away, he had orchestrated his departure with surgical precision, cloaking his intentions under the guise of a forgiving husband while methodically planning his revenge. The man I thought I knew, the one I believed would stand by me through thick and thin, had vanished, leaving behind a stranger with a heart bent on retribution. The fallout from our fractured marriage wasn't just emotional, it was profoundly financial. The lifestyle I once took for granted, the comfort and security I thought were mine to keep, slipped through my fingers like sand. One by one, I watched as my possessions, symbols of a life I could no longer claim as my own, were sold off to cover mounting debts. Each sale was a reminder of the cost of my choices, a tangible measure of how far I'd fallen. The stress and humiliation bore down on me, manifesting in health issues that couldn't be ignored. My body, once resilient, now rebelled against me, forcing me into an extended leave from work. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had jeopardized my job for a fleeting affair, and now, when I needed stability more than ever, my health betrayed me. In a cruel twist of fate, I saw Mark and his new partner at a mutual friends gathering. Their laughter and shared glances were a vivid contrast to the isolation that cloaked me. Surrounded by faces that once represented friendship and camaraderie, I felt more alienated than ever. The joy in their eyes was a painful reminder of the happiness I had squandered. I couldn't bear it. I left early, slipping away unnoticed. A ghost at the feast, a forgotten shadow in a room filled with light. Later, a message from Mark appeared on my phone. Not a bridge to reconciliation, but a final, unequivocal severance. "Please, do not contact me again," it read. The words were a cold closure to any lingering hope of forgiveness, a clear demarcation of our lives henceforth. The man I had loved, the partner I had betrayed, was irrevocably gone. The divorce proceedings stripped me of more than just my marital status. I was left with a fraction of our assets, the legal battle draining what little remained of my savings. The settlement was a stark reminder of my newfound reality, alone, financially unstable, and burdened with the weight of public judgment. As I navigated through the debris of my former life, attempting to rebuild from the ashes, I was constantly reminded of the price of my actions. The journey was laden with hardships, each step forward a battle against the shadows of my past. The luxurious lifestyle, the security, and the companionship I once enjoyed were now just echoes of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. In the solitude of my reduced circumstances, I confronted the hard truths of my actions and their consequences. The journey ahead was uncertain, marked by the lessons of my past and the daunting task of forging a new path. The scars of the ordeal were deep, but in them I found a grim determination to rebuild, to find a semblance of peace amidst the turmoil. The road to redemption was long and fraught with challenges, but it was a road I was determined to travel, armed with the painful wisdom of hindsight. The sting of isolation became a constant companion when I found myself scrubbed from the guest lists of gatherings that were once the highlight of my social life. It was a silent but clear message from mutual friends: I was no longer welcome. The fallout of my choices wasn't just a private battle, it had public repercussions, alienating me from a community I once thought of as my own. In a bid to salvage what was left of my reputation and perhaps my conscience, I turned to volunteering. I thought, maybe, in the selflessness of giving back, I could find a semblance of redemption, or at least distraction. But even there, whispers of my past snaked their way through, coloring interactions with a tinge of suspicion and reservation. It seemed my actions had cast a longer shadow than I had anticipated, one that stretched far beyond the confines of my personal life into the very essence of who I was trying to become. The finality of my situation truly hit home when I attempted to dial Mark's number, only to be met with the impersonal message that it had been changed. That act, changing his number, felt like the severing of the last thread that connected us, a definitive end to any hope of reconciliation or even a simple conversation. It was a realization that left me reeling, the permanence of it all sinking in with a weight that was suffocating. As the anniversary of our divorce came and went, unmarked and unacknowledged, the day echoed with a silence that was louder than any celebration could have been. It was a stark reminder of what was lost, a love that had turned to bitterness, a partnership dissolved in the acrimony of betrayal and revenge. That date, once a milestone of happiness, now stood as a monument to my greatest loss. But nothing prepared me for the gut punch of seeing Mark propose to his new partner on social media. The joy in their faces, the intimacy of the moment captured for the world to see, was a stark contrast to the desolation that had become my constant companion. It was as if I was watching my past being rewritten, my place in it erased by someone new, someone unmarred by the mistakes that had defined me. In those moments, in the quiet despair that followed, I was confronted with a painful truth. I was the architect of my own downfall. My decisions, my actions, had led me here, to this point of irrevocable loss. The weight of that realization was crushing, a burden of guilt and regret that I carried with me, a constant reminder of the cost of my choices. Mark's departure from my life, his silent revenge, was a lesson in the consequences of betrayal. He had moved on, leaving me to grapple with the fallout of our shattered marriage alone. I was left broken, a mere shadow of the woman I once was, with no clear path forward. The future, once bright with possibilities, now seemed dim, obscured by the wreckage of my past actions. In the solitude of my new reality, I was forced to confront the person I had become, to acknowledge the role I played in my own demise. The journey of self-reflection was a harrowing one, filled with if-onlys and what-ifs. But in the end, it was a journey I had to undertake, to understand the depth of my mistakes and to somehow find a way to live with them. Mark's quiet exit, though a punishment in itself, was also a catalyst for this painful but necessary introspection, a chance to rebuild from the ruins, no matter how daunting the task. The first time Alex's hand brushed against mine, it felt like a jolt of electricity. There, in the middle of a chaotic family gathering, amidst the laughter and the endless small talk, something shifted. I'm Marissa, by the way, a nurse with more double shifts under my belt than I care to count, and Alex, well, he's my husband's brother. A little too charming for his own good and struggling with his own demons. But that moment, it was just a brief escape from the relentless pressure of my life. An escape I desperately needed. Our conversation started innocently enough. A text here, a call there. How's the shift going? He'd ask, and for the first time in a long while, I felt heard. Understood. It wasn't long before those texts became the highlight of my day. A secret retreat from the demands of being a wife, a mother, and an RN. But with every stolen moment, a twinge of guilt nagged at me. I shoved it aside, convincing myself it was nothing more than an emotional crutch. We're just talking, I'd rationalize, ignoring the growing intensity of our connection. Then came the call that changed everything. Daniel, my husband, needed surgery, a colon resection. My heart sank, not just for him, but selfishly, for the timing. My secret world with Alex was expanding, and now, real life was crashing in, demanding attention I wasn't sure I had to give. The surgery didn't go well. Daniel's recovery was slow, complicated, and needed more from me than I felt capable of giving. It was the perfect excuse to retreat further into my affair with Alex. Each visit to the hospital left me more drained, more eager for the solace Alex offered. I was drowning, and Alex was my life raft. I didn't see it coming the moment Daniel found out. Maybe I was naive, or maybe I was too caught up in my own escape to care. He confronted me one evening, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes filled with a pain I had caused. I promised it was over, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. My betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it had crossed lines I never thought I would. The secrecy, the lies, it all intensified, wrapping around us like a shroud. The thrill of the affair had blinded me to its consequences, but standing there, facing the man I had vowed to love and cherish, the weight of my actions crashed into me. Yet, I couldn't stop. The affair with Alex wasn't just an escape anymore, it had become a compulsion, a risk I was willing to take, despite everything at stake. The moment Daniel reached out to me, his voice laced with hope and desperation, I felt the floor drop beneath me. We need to be a unit now, more than ever, he said, his hand trembling as it reached for mine. His eyes, as weary from the pain and medication, searched mine for a sign of the woman he married. I nodded, muttering a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. My heart, entangled in a mess of guilt and forbidden emotion, ached at the sight of him. As the days passed, the air in our home grew heavy with unspoken accusations and lingering doubts. Conversations at dinner tables turned into interrogations, each question from our kids like a dagger to my conscience. I could see the strain on Daniel's face, the effort it took to smile, to pretend for their sake. The facade of normalcy we tried to uphold was cracking, and I felt powerless to stop it. Then, the confrontation I'd been dreading. Daniel's friend, Mark, cornered me one evening, his phone in hand. "I know about you and Alex," he said, his voice low but laced with disappointment. The evidence was there, in texts and pictures, a timeline of my betrayal. The walls I had built around my secret world came crashing down, and the weight of my choices pressed down on me with a force I couldn't bear. The news of our affair broke through our family's fragile veneer of stability like a storm. Whispers turned into shouts, and the home we built together felt more like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over, scalding me with its intensity. I had to end it with Alex, cut off the connection that had become my escape. But confronting Alex was like trying to sever a limb. Our relationship, once a solace, had morphed into something complex and consuming. "We can't do this anymore," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. But Alex, entangled in his own spiral of need and dependency, refused to let go. "We're meant to be together," he insisted, a plea wrapped in denial. The finality I sought was elusive, slipping through my fingers like water. Daniel's health showed signs of improvement, a small mercy in a sea of turmoil. Yet, the emotional scars left by my betrayal seemed to hinder his recovery more than any physical ailment. Our family, once a haven of love and support, now felt like a battleground, each day a test of endurance. I realized then, amidst the chaos of my own making, that the cost of my actions extended far beyond my own pain. The betrayal had not just eroded my marriage but had fractured the very foundation of our family, leaving wounds that might never fully heal. In the sterile light of the hospital where I've spent more years than I care to count, my life started to unravel. My name is Marissa, and I'm a nurse, but lately, my focus hasn't been on my patients. It's been on the mess I've made of my life. The chaos of my personal affairs began to bleed into my professional ones, my hands shaking as I administer medications, my mind miles away, lost in a fog of guilt and regret. Then came the ultimatum from Daniel, like a slap in the face, snapping me back to a reality I'd been trying to escape. "Marissa, it's him or us. Therapy or I'm filing for separation." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his pain. The choice seemed impossible, yet it was crystal clear. The irony wasn't lost on me, a healer by profession, yet I was the one tearing my family apart. As if on cue, the affair that I had so desperately clung to as my lifeline became my albatross. Whispers turned into shouts, and before I knew it, our small town was abuzz with the news of my indiscretion. The support system I had relied on, both personally and professionally, crumbled beneath the weight of judgment and disappointment. The confrontation with my children broke me. "Why, Mom?" Their eyes, so much like their father's, searched mine for an explanation I couldn't give. "How do you explain to your children that you've lost your way, that the person they looked up to has fallen so far?" The hurt in their voices was a constant echo in my mind, a reminder of the pain I'd inflicted on those I loved most. Alex's descent into his own troubles only pulled me deeper into the quagmire. His arrest for drug-related charges was the cold shower I needed, a harsh wake-up call to the destructive path I was on. The man I thought I knew, the escape I thought I had found, was nothing but a mirage. The day Daniel filed for separation, I was at work. The papers were delivered to me in front of my colleagues, a public display of my private failures. My world, both at home and at work, had come crashing down around me. In the aftermath, I tried to mend the bridges I had burned, to salvage what was left of my relationship with my children. But the damage was done. Their trust, once unshakable, was now in ruins. The foundation of our family, built over years of love and shared experiences, had been shattered by my actions. The arrest of Alex was a turning point, forcing me to confront the reality of my choices. The man I had risked everything for was a stranger, and the life I had jeopardized was the one I truly wanted. The clarity came too late, and the cost was more than I could have imagined. My attempts to rebuild my relationship with my family were met with resistance, a tangible reminder of the irreversible damage my actions had caused. The morning I realized the full extent of my downfall, I was standing in the middle of what used to be our family kitchen, now just a reminder of everything I'd lost. My name is Marissa, and if you told me a year ago that my life would unravel to this degree, I'd have laughed. Yet here I was, grappling with the fallout of my choices, both financial and social, that seemed to bury me deeper into a hole I dug myself. The decision to seek therapy wasn't easy. Admitting I needed help felt like confirming my failure, but the ruins of my marriage and the identity crisis that followed left me no choice. Sitting in that small, too warm room, I voiced the words for the first time. I was selfish. I betrayed my family. The acknowledgement didn't bring relief, just a deeper understanding of the chasm I'd created between myself and the people I loved most. Meanwhile, Daniel and our children were adapting to a new normal without me. Their resilience was a stark contrast to my ongoing battle to piece together a semblance of my former life. The news of my pregnancy with Alex's child shattered any lingering hope of reconciliation. The irony of creating a new life while the ones I already had were falling apart wasn't lost on me. The legal battles that ensued drained what little I had left, both financially and emotionally. Selling the house felt like erasing the last physical evidence of a life that once was. My relationship with Alex, once a misguided source of solace, had deteriorated beyond repair, especially after his arrest. The thrill, the escape it once provided, was now just a bitter reminder of everything it destroyed. Isolation gave me too much time to think, to reflect on the impact of my decisions. The hurt in my children's eyes, the loss of the family we built together, weighed heavily on me. It was during one of these moments of solitude that the gravity of my selfishness fully hit me. My actions didn't just affect me, they altered the course of my children's lives, instilling a sense of betrayal and abandonment no child should ever feel. This chapter of my life, marked by loss and regret, forced me to confront the reality of my actions head-on. The journey to redemption and self-forgiveness was going to be a long one, perhaps even lifelong. But for the first time, I was ready to face it, no matter how daunting the path ahead seemed. The day I lost the last shred of support from my parents, it felt like the world had officially turned its back on me. "We're just so disappointed." Marissa, my dad's voice was heavy, laden with a mix of sadness and disbelief. My mom, usually my rock, couldn't even meet my eyes. Their words were a stark reminder of how far I'd fallen, from a respected nurse and a loving mother to this. Feeling utterly alone, I sought out a support group. Walking into that room, filled with strangers each nursing their own stories of regret and loss, was intimidating. Yet, as I listened and shared, a fragile sense of belonging began to weave its way around me. I made choices that hurt the people I love the most, I admitted out loud, my voice trembling with the weight of my confession. Their nods of understanding offered a sliver of comfort in my sea of guilt. Back at work, the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers followed me down the hallways, and the respect I once commanded as a senior nurse had evaporated. My professional reputation, built over years of hard work and dedication, was now tarnished by personal failures. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career healing others, yet I couldn't mend the wounds I'd inflicted on my own life. The move to a smaller apartment felt like yet another step down a ladder I'd been climbing my whole life. Each box I packed was a tangible reminder of what I'd lost. The space was a fraction of the size of our family home, the walls closing in on me, echoing the constriction I felt in my chest. This was the price of my decisions, measured in square footage and a view of the parking lot. Trying to rebuild the relationship with my children was by far the hardest part. I reached out, time and again, only to be met with silence or, worse, outright rejection. Their coldness was a painful reminder of the innocence lost to my betrayal. "Mom, why can't you just understand? You hurt us all." My son's words cut through me during one of our rare conversations. The distance between us felt insurmountable, a chasm widened by my actions and their consequences. The confrontation at Daniel's new home was supposed to be a step towards healing, an opportunity to explain myself to my children. But as I stood there, stumbling over my words, their expressions ranged from indifferent to hurt. The door closing behind me, both literally and metaphorically, was a sound I knew would haunt me. The rejection was a physical ache, a heartbreak that no words could soothe. In this chapter of my life, filled with loss and regret, I found myself clinging to the slivers of hope offered in support group meetings, the brief moments of understanding from strangers. The journey ahead was daunting, a path towards redemption littered with the debris of my past decisions. Yet, it was a path I knew I had to take, not just for my own sake, but for the chance, however slim, of one day restoring the bonds I had so carelessly broken. The day I heard of Alex's release, my heart didn't leap, it sank. A wave of cold realization washed over me, a stark reminder of the path I had chosen and where it led me. Here I was, Marissa, once a wife and a mother, now grappling with the aftermath of my decisions, standing alone in the dim light of my small apartment, feeling nothing but the weight of my mistakes. The battles didn't end with Alex's release. They merely shifted battlegrounds to courtrooms and lawyers' offices where I fought not for love, but for the right to see my children. Each legal bill was a reminder of the price of my actions, not just emotional but now deeply financial. My savings, once earmarked for family vacations and college funds, were dwindling to nothing in the pursuit of redemption. Stress manifested not just in sleepless nights but in physical ailments, a tangible representation of the turmoil that churned inside me. Headaches, stomach issues, a constant reminder of the life I'd upended. It felt like my body was rebelling against me, another consequence of the path I'd chosen. Running into Sarah, a friend from what felt like another lifetime, was like looking into a mirror of my past. The casual, "How have you been?" felt loaded with unspoken judgment. Her life moved forward, filled with milestones and celebrations, while mine had stalled, trapped in a cycle of regret and what-ifs. The contrast between her vibrant social life and my isolation was a bitter pill to swallow. Attempting to date again felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Each encounter ended in awkwardness, my past a shadow that loomed too large for any potential relationship. It wasn't just about finding someone. It was about confronting the fact that I wasn't the same person who once shared a life with Daniel. My identity had been so intertwined with my family that now, adrift, I struggled to find who I was beyond the wreckage. In an effort to claw back some semblance of purpose, I started volunteering at a local shelter. Serving meals, listening to stories, and offering a comforting word, I found a slice of redemption. Each act of service was a step towards forgiving myself, a way to give back when I felt I had taken so much from those I loved. Hearing of Daniel's remarriage was the closure I didn't know I needed. It severed the last thread of hope I harbored for our past life together. I realized then that moving forward wasn't just a choice but a necessity. Despite everything, hearing about my children's achievements brought a mix of pride and pain. Their resilience was a testament to their strength, a painful reminder of what I had missed. Their successes were milestones I celebrated from afar, each one a bittersweet reminder of the cost of my choices. In this chapter of my life, marked by loss and slow redemption, I found strength in unexpected places. Volunteering, facing my health issues, and confronting my social isolation allowed me to start rebuilding, piece by piece. The journey was far from over, but each step, no matter how small, was a move towards reclaiming the shards of my former self and forging a new path forward. The darkness seemed to close in around me, a tangible weight that pressed down on every inch of my being. My name is Marissa, and with each passing day, my struggle with depression carved deeper grooves into my life, making it harder to imagine a path back to the light. The fight wasn't just uphill, it was against a part of myself that seemed determined to keep me anchored in a sea of regret. Then came the day at work when everything that could go wrong, did. Medication errors, patient complaints, it was a cascade of mistakes that couldn't be ignored. Standing in the office of my supervisor, the reality of my situation couldn't have been clearer. "Marissa, you need to get it together," she said, her tone a mix of concern and frustration. It was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed, a push towards confronting the avoidance tactics that had become my norm. It was time for genuine self-improvement, not just for my career but for my very survival. In my search for peace, I found myself drawn back to the spirituality I had neglected. Quiet moments in prayer and reflection became my solace, offering a sense of guidance and clarity I had been missing. It wasn't about finding all the answers but seeking comfort in the journey and the belief that there was a path forward, however winding it might be. Just as I began to find my footing, life threw another curveball, an unexpected financial setback. The meager savings I had managed to scrape together were wiped out by an unforeseen expense, plunging me back into a state of uncertainty. Yet, this challenge, instead of breaking me, tested my resolve. I was determined not to let it derail the progress I had made. Amidst this turmoil, a sliver of hope emerged when my parents reached out. Their initial words of disappointment had evolved into a tentative offer of support. "We're here if you need us," they said, their voices softening. It was a cautious reconnection, but the warmth in their gesture was undeniable, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. Compelled by a need to express the tumult of emotions I felt, I began writing letters to my children, letters I never intended to send. Each word was a cathartic release of my guilt and love, a way to articulate the depth of my feelings and the hope for their future, even if I couldn't be a part of it as I once was. My journey reached a poignant moment during a solo birthday celebration in my modest apartment. The quiet reflection in the glow of a single candle illuminated the irrevocable changes my choices had wrought. There were no grand gestures of forgiveness waiting in the wings, no miraculous restoration of the life I had before. Instead, there was a sobering acceptance of my new reality and the acknowledgement of the long road ahead. The road to mend what could be mended, to rebuild myself not as I was, but as I could be. This wasn't the end of my story, but a chapter that taught me the hardest lessons about love, loss, and the resilience of the human. My suitcase thumped onto the bed, a heavy weight that matched my mood. Mark stood in the doorway, tie already loosened with that earnest puppy dog look of his. "Honey, it'll be fun." "Good for networking," he chirped, completely oblivious to the mental eye roll happening behind my carefully neutral expression. "Sure, fun," I muttered, the forced good cheer of these company retreats always exhausted me. It was like everyone had to pretend they adored each other even while discreetly checking for promotions over their colleagues' shoulders. My work, nowhere near the flashy stuff Mark dealt with. I was the paper pusher, the invisible behind-the-scenes support that let his star shine brighter. Resignation settled over me, he'd already booked the swanky hotel, and the guilt would be unbearable if I refuse. Fine, I sighed, giving in. Sometimes it was simply easier. 2 days later, dressed in a way that screamed, responsible but not ambitious, "Dear boss," I felt a pang of resentment. We'd spent the morning rearranging our schedules for this, and the opening dinner already had me itching to leave. Bored speeches about profits and blah blah blah. I was going to lose my mind. Then, I caught his eye. Across the banquet hall, he stood out. Not the stuffy suits, or even the try-hard younger crowd. No, this guy carried himself with an amused ease, like he was watching a play rather than starring in it. I couldn't help but zero in. The neatly trimmed beard, a smile with a hint of mischief, eyes the color of strong whiskey. Then, for a split second, our gazes locked. Heat flushed through me, unexpected and inappropriate. He must have felt it too, a quickening spark of connection. But as quickly as it came, it was gone. My boring life reasserting itself in the form of Mark waving me towards his table. "Sarah's going to love you. She runs HR," Mark's voice chirruped in my ear as he pulled me away. I forced a smile, but my gaze kept straying back to the whiskey-eyed stranger. Turns out, forced cheer is even worse with an irritating crush buzzing at the edge of your awareness. Mark got sucked into some deal that sounded ridiculously complex, and I was left to my own devices, feeling distinctly awkward as two women debated the finer points of accounting software. That's when he reappeared, the handsome stranger. Mind if I rescue you from thrilling discussions of spreadsheets? He asked, a twinkle in his eye. Before I could think, I blurted, absolutely. Smooth, real smooth. He chuckled, his laughter warm and genuine. Jake, he introduced himself. And you are. The rest of the night was, well, not what I expected. No sleazy pickup lines, no awkward bragging, instead, we talked about dumb reality shows, the bizarre habits of our bosses, why neither of us could ever master those stupid team-building icebreaker games. I laughed till my sides ached, and the weight of this whole retreat seemed to ease just a little. Let's ditch the rest of this snooze fest, Jake suggested later, as the evening dragged on. I hear there's a path down by the lake, some moonlight. Way more appealing than canapes and corporate speak. Something in me hesitated, not the voice of reason, mind you. A much subtler voice, the whisper of forgotten excitement, the part of me Mark's steady, predictable world had neatly tucked away. As we strolled, the path dark and secluded, a lightness bloomed in me I hadn't felt in years. Then, his hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch. My heart tripped, was it accidental, or was this the start of something dangerous? Either possibility sent a delicious shiver down my spine. Waking, Jake's face swam into focus. Stupid traitorous brain, was it the second glass of wine? The thrill of feeling? Noticed? Whatever the cause, I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the warmth of them, seeing me as more than just Mark's wife. Ridiculous, I know, but as the retreat buzzed into its second day, my focus fractured. Mark was off schmoozing, and I was doomed to some ghastly team-building scavenger hunt. At least the prospect of fresh air beat another PowerPoint presentation. That's when I saw him, Jake, casually strolling my way. Had he orchestrated this? A silly grin spread across my face, and I couldn't even bring myself to care that it was probably inappropriate. Looks like we're stuck together, Jake said, his voice a low rumble that sent a ridiculous shiver down my spine. Guess they're desperate for warm bodies, I retorted, trying and failing to keep the excitement from my voice. The tasks were, as predicted, utterly inane. But Jake turned it into an inside joke. His subtle digs at the cheesy clues and forced enthusiasm had me choking back laughter. Then it happened, over there, I whispered, pointing to a scrap of paper half hidden beneath a bush. We pounced, the thrill of discovery sharp and unexpected. We exchanged a conspiratorial wink. A silent yes against them, and that's when the first pang of guilt hit. It was tiny, easily ignored, but definitely there. The afternoon workshop was a blur. Somehow, Jake and I ended up in the same breakout group. He seemed different here, not the casual charmer, but thoughtful, sharp. When he spoke about taking initiative, about finding purpose, my treacherous heart did a little flutter. Honestly, the man was trouble. And captivating, and so very not Mark. Drinks were the obvious next step. Jake cornered me, a teasing glint in his eyes, so, are you going to save me from corporate karaoke night, or do I have to find another way to endure it? It was an excuse, and we both knew it. Saying no seemed pointless. The guilt was back, stronger this time, an uncomfortable knot in my stomach. But as I lied to Mark, claiming a sudden headache, a thrill buzzed underneath the guilt. The bar was dimly lit, the perfect place to shed the forced cheer of the retreat. The drinks were strong, and I found myself talking to Jake with an ease I hadn't felt in years. Not about the kids, or the mortgage, or the endless to-do list that was my life, but about stupid dreams, forgotten ambitions. The things I barely acknowledged even to myself. You deserve more, Jake said quietly, the warmth of the whiskey mirrored in his eyes. I tried to brush it off, but the sincerity hit me. Did he actually see me, or was this just a clever line, a practiced seduction? My head spun, a mix of excitement and the beginnings of real fear. The line between harmless flirtation and something else had blurred. And I was pretty sure I was already way past it. My heart hammered a ridiculous tattoo against my ribs as I walked into the bar. Why the hell had I agreed to this? The dim lights, the low murmur of voices, it all felt conspiratorial, a world where normal rules didn't quite apply. You made it, Jake murmured, his nearness setting my skin alight. We took a corner booth, tucked away, hidden. Every sip of my cocktail burned a fiery path down my throat, matching the hum of nervous excitement coursing through me. And then, we started talking. Not about spreadsheets or sales targets, but about life. The dreams I'd tucked away behind sensible cardigans. The sharp-edged frustrations, never voiced out loud, festering into quiet resentment against Mark and the steady predictability of my days. With Jake, none of that mattered. The years seemed to melt away. I was witty again, spirited, even a bit reckless, the younger me I'd forgotten existed. Mark just doesn't get it, I confided, then immediately regretted the betrayal in my voice. But Jake just nodded, a flicker of something like understanding in his eyes. You want more, he said quietly, not as a question, it was a statement, an accusation, and a promise all in one. A slow song drifted from the speakers, and Jake's hand covered mine on the table. May I? He asked, and it was all I could do to nod. The dance floor was small, crowded, and it forced us close. Too close. His hand slid lower on my back, the warmth of it seeping through my dress. The music pulsed, a mirror to the thrumming of my own blood. His face was mere inches from mine, the scent of his cologne heady and intoxicating. I should have pulled away, told him this was going too far. Instead, I closed my eyes, waited for the kiss. But it didn't come, he pulled back, just slightly, the tension sparking between us almost unbearable. You should get back, Jake whispered, he doesn't deserve you. And with those words, a compliment twisted into a condemnation, he walked me to the door. Back at the retreat, Mark's sleeping form seemed almost repulsive. The warmth of Jake's eyes lingered in my memory, a stark contrast to the dull ache of my usual routine. Guilt flooded me, hot and bitter, but laced with the intoxicating aftertaste of Jake's words. The next morning, every shared glance with Jake was electric. He'd broken down some invisible wall, and now the air between us was charged. Was it a dangerous thrill, or a sign of something more, something terrifying and real? I didn't know, and the not knowing both exhilarated and terrified me. My life, so carefully built and ordered, seemed to be cracking along fault lines I'd never even noticed. My fingers fumbled with my phone, trying to seem casual even though my pulse pounded in my ears. Jake's text was short, simple, and utterly devastating. Can't stop thinking about last night. Neither can I whispered to myself, then immediately deleted the thought before it could fully form. This was a game I was playing with fire, and I desperately needed to pretend it wasn't burning me already. Still, I couldn't stop the traitorous little thrill that curled through me at his words. The rest of the day was a blur. Meetings, presentations, the usual corporate noise faded into the background. Images of Jake kept intruding. The warmth of his hands, the intensity of his gaze, the memory of his mouth, tantalizingly close. It was horrifying how quickly these thoughts overshadowed everything. Mark's kind eyes lacked Jake's dangerous spark. His steady jokes braided against a memory of Jake's easy laughter. Was I truly comparing my husband, the man who provided stability for our family, to an exciting stranger? Breakfast the next morning was torture. Every time I glanced around, I expected to see Jake. Then, there he was, eyes locking with mine across the crowded buffet. Had his smile always been that wicked? My insides turned to jelly. Fancy running into you here, he purred. The lightness in his voice felt mocking. Or was I overthinking it? Was this all simple flirtation? I longed to believe it, but the pounding of my pulse said otherwise. Somehow we ended up assigned to the same hiking group later that day. Was this coincidence, or some twisted joke? The trail was steep, and when he offered, "Here, let me help you," it felt more like an order than a question. As his hand brushed my waist, steadying me, my traitorous skin betrayed me with a shock of heat. We fell into step beside each other, the others far ahead. The conversation flowed, twisting away from the safe impersonal topics and into the hidden, shadowed corners of my own discontent. I hated how easy it was to tell him things I'd never dared breathe aloud. Reaching a clearing with a sweeping view, I felt a surge of breathlessness. Not just from the climb, but from being alone with him. This was insanity. And then he turned to me, and this time there was no playful teasing in his eyes. The kiss was inevitable, not sweet, not gentle. It was an inferno, hungry, demanding. And damn it, I responded, hands clutching at his shirt, all thoughts of Mark and consequences evaporating in the intensity. Then it was over as quickly as it began. Oh God, what did I just do? I sputtered, pulling away. His expression? Was it guilt or just the fading echo of desire? All he said was, "We should get back." The hike down was a blur of panic and shame. Each step took me further from the thrilling rush and deeper into a sickening pit of self-disgust. I couldn't look at him. The shared laughter and easy conversation of the rest of our hike seemed like a mockery, a sick joke after what had transpired. Jake wisely held his distance as we rejoined the group, and thankfully the remainder of the day was a blur of forced pleasantries and careful avoidance. But at dinner, a new fear seized me. From across the room, a woman stared at our table, not directly at me or Jake, but with a focused intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Her eyes were sharp, her expression unreadable. Did she see something? Could she possibly know? My usual facade of calm crumbled completely. Mark was beaming after some successful deal or other, his cheerful prattling about profits and sales a tortuous soundtrack to my rising panic. Every time his hand brushed mine, I flinched away, consumed by a sickening mix of shame and white-hot anger. How could he be so oblivious, so content with this mediocre life he'd built around us? "Is everything all right, darling?" Mark asked later, and the genuine concern in his voice twisted the knife deeper. It sparked a vicious resentment unlike anything I'd ever felt towards him. My responses were clipped, barbed. I found excuses to avoid his touch, the very sight of him making my skin crawl. The retreat, designed to bolster teamwork and camaraderie, had instead become a personal battleground. That night, sleep was impossible. Self-loathing warred with the lingering, traitorous ghost of Jake's kiss. Each time Mark turned towards me, reaching out with a sleepy murmur, I pushed him away, claiming exhaustion. The guilt twisted and clawed, but underneath it flickered a perverse excitement. Had Jake broken something in me? Was this feeling of being thrillingly alive only possible at such a cost? The last morning was frantic. I feigned cheerfulness, desperate to put this wretched weekend behind me. But under my door, a folded note awaited. Jake's handwriting, scrawled and urgent. "We need to talk, where have you gone?" The note went up in flames in the bathroom sink, but the words were seared into my memory. I was drowning. I knew I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. But the thrill of danger lingered. Could I pull myself back from this ledge? Did I even want to? The answers scared me more than anything had in a very long time. Home, yet it felt alien. The scent of coffee, usually so comforting, triggered a sharp stab of nausea instead. I went through the motions, fixing Mark breakfast, hearing about his successful retreat, even managing a weak smile. But the gaping chasm between us felt uncrossable. How could I look at him without seeing Jake's ghost beside him? I tried desperately to cling to routine. My job, my usual errands, a thin safety net stretched across an abyss of shame and turmoil. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. There he was. In my coffee shop, my sanctuary, the place where I was just myself, not Mark's wife. A surge of panic almost made me turn and run. But I was trapped by morbid fascination as Jake approached, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, look who's back in the real world. He slid into the opposite chair, acting as if this were all one big coincidence. My mind raced. Had he followed me? Did he know how my resolve was shattering? I couldn't show any weakness. Fancy meeting you here, I countered, my voice brittle. His probing gaze was a weight on my shoulders as he casually recounted a supposed work meeting nearby. I knew he was lying through his teeth. This was calculated, manipulative. He was circling, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Then it came. The hook I didn't see coming. Nice guy, Mark, Jake remarked. Seems like his career's really taking off. I actually know his old partner, Sarah, lovely woman. We worked together briefly years ago. Everything inside me went still. Sarah. My Sarah. The one constant in my life? How did Jake know her? And what had he done with that knowledge? Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A text. From Jake. Don't mention our thing to Sarah. The blood drained from my face. There was no innocence here, no harmless flirtation. This was a game, and he'd been playing me the entire time. Panic twisted into fury. I needed answers. Look, I said, my voice steely, let's cut the crap, Jake. What do you want? He'd underestimated me, and it was time to change the power dynamic. We need to talk, I declared, the words tasting like acid. Meet me. Tomorrow, noon, the park near the lake. My choice, my rules this time. He seemed amused, a flicker of something like respect replacing the predatory gleam in his eyes. But at that moment, I didn't care. I'd finally stopped falling, and now it was time to fight back. Every second that ticked past brought the confrontation with Jake closer. My stomach was a relentless knot, the battle between fear and fury draining me. I had to protect myself, protect Sarah, but at what cost? The park was unusually empty. Gray clouds mirrored my mood. My usual jogging trail suddenly felt ominous, each rustle of leaves making me jump. Then I saw him, leaning against a tree, that familiar half-smile playing across his lips. Glad you could make it, he purred. The lightness of his tone infuriated me. I'd spent all night pacing my room, and he acted like this was a casual coffee date. Let's get this over with, I snapped. What the hell is your game, Jake? The easy charm faded. Oh, it's a simple one, really, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah owes me. Big time. And I want to collect. My blood ran cold. What could Sarah, with her careful reputation, her organized life, have done to put herself in the crosshairs of someone like Jake? He spun his tale. A past business deal gone wrong. Sarah supposedly double-crossing him, the scent of big money hanging in the air. Then the ultimatum came. Help me get what I'm owed, or I'll ruin her. Think carefully. Your friend's secrets could get very messy, very public. The world seemed to tilt. This couldn't be real. Yet, the ruthless determination in Jake's eyes was terrifyingly genuine. Betray Sarah, or suffer the consequences? The choice felt like a noose around my neck. Telling Sarah seemed the right thing to do. But what if Jake wasn't bluffing? What if Sarah had done something far worse than I could imagine? Doubt clawed at me, turning loyalties to dust. Meanwhile, Mark's gentle concern had morphed into suspicion. You're hiding something, he accused, his voice tight with a hurt I deserved. Each question, each worried glance chipped away at my fabricated calm. The retreat incident seemed like a lifetime ago, yet its consequences were strangling me. And then, there was that damn woman, the one who had stared so intently. I caught her again, peering at me from across the street, her eyes dark with, what? Recognition, warning? All this was tearing me apart. During a particularly heated argument with Mark, I came perilously close to blurting out everything. Jake, the kiss, the threats. But even at my lowest point, some twisted sliver of self-preservation held me back. I was trapped, a prisoner in a tangled web of lies. It seemed everyone knew more than I did, everyone except for me, the fool at the center. Sarah's voice on the phone made my stomach clench. It wasn't her usual bright tone, but something tentative, concerned. "Hey, you okay? Been trying to reach you. Is everything all right?" Was this just friendly catch-up, or did she sense my fraying edges? Paranoia whispered that she knew, that Jake had gotten to her somehow. But logic fought back, surely he wouldn't be that bold. "Yeah, just busy," I managed, my voice hoarse. "What's up?" I tried to keep it light, but every word felt like a lie pressed against my skin. That night, I couldn't sleep. I craved answers, a way to fight back against Jake. The knowledge of Sarah's vulnerability, mixed with a desperate need to regain some sliver of control, fueled me. The internet became my weapon. Hours of frantic searching, and then, there it was. A news article, buried but not deeply enough. Jake's real name wasn't Jake at all. It was linked to a financial scandal a few years back, accusations of fraud, banished funds. My heart pounded, I'd stumbled across something huge. It was a lifeline. Armed with my newfound knowledge, I engineered another meeting with Jake. This time, the park was a battleground, my carefully composed facade barely masking the simmering anger beneath. "So, Jake, or should I call you Michael?" I spat, watching his composure crack. "Turns out, you're not quite the successful businessman you pretend to be." He didn't deny it. His eyes narrowed, his veneer of charm replaced with raw hostility. It confirmed everything. This wasn't some misunderstanding with Sarah. It was a scam, and I was his pawn. He tried to downplay it, some excuse about past mistakes, but his threats were bolder, darker. "I could get hurt," he said. "Mark could get hurt." His words chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a flirtation, not some office crush gone wrong. This man was truly dangerous. Escape wouldn't be easy. My desperation grew, yet another thing to hide from Mark, whose worried eyes seemed to bore into my soul each day. And then, amidst the turmoil, a twist I hadn't seen coming. Snooping for anything that could give me leverage against Jake, I'd stumbled across something far closer to home. A hidden box, old love letters, and the name scrawled on them was not mine. The trail cut like a shard of glass. Was Mark capable of deception too? Had my reckless pursuit of excitement, of feeling something, anything, blinded me to cracks in my own supposed happy life? Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I was drowning in a sea of lies, Jake's, my own, and now maybe even Mark's. My hands were clammy as I dialed Sarah's number. I desperately needed an ally, but how could I possibly confess the whole sordid mess? I, the woman always so careful, so in control, reduced to a trembling, shameful wreck by my own stupidity. "Sarah, please, I need to see you." "It's urgent," my voice cracked pathetically, but she, bless her, picked up on the desperation immediately. We met at a tiny, out-of-the-way cafe, the kind you'd only know if you were a local. The words poured out of me, a torrent of guilt, fear, and self-loathing. Sarah's face was a mask of shock, but beneath that, I glimpsed a flicker of understanding. Then she dropped the bombshell. "He tried this before, years ago, when we first worked together. Smaller scale swindle, but the same pattern, manipulation, then threats." She paused. "I never told anyone. I was embarrassed, paid him off, and told myself I could handle it." Sarah didn't owe Jake a damn thing. He'd spun a web of lies, and I'd fallen right into it. That realization ignited a flicker of defiance in me. If he'd played this game before, we could outsmart him. Sarah and I, over bitter coffee and shared fury, hatched our plan. It was precarious. It relied on trust. A currency in short supply after my spectacular betrayal. Yet there was a grim satisfaction in fighting back, in using my own mistakes as fuel against a predator. Mark, meanwhile, reached his breaking point. He found the letters. His confrontation was heartbreaking. A mix of wounded betrayal and a chilling hollowness, as if he'd been suspecting this for a long time. In desperation, I fired back with the truth about Jake. It was brutal, ugly, and the final nail in the coffin of our once comfortable life. I felt neither guilt nor satisfaction in that moment, only an awful sense of inevitability. Everything I'd known was crumbling. Sarah, surprisingly, proved the unwavering one. Our trap for Jake was risky. A staged meeting, the promise of incriminating information Sarah supposedly had, irresistible bait for his kind of greed. The meeting point was public, witnesses all around, a flimsy safety net in case things went horribly wrong. He arrived, cocky and self-assured, a sheen of fake concern masking his avarice. But this time, the tables had turned. Sarah dropped the act, and I was right there beside her. His eyes flickered between us, panic replacing the arrogance. We laid it all out. The fraud, the threats, his real identity. He tried bluster, but it fell flat. And then, the icing on the cake. The woman from the retreat emerged from the crowd. Another one wronged, another one ready to destroy his carefully built facade. His threats were hollow now. He'd gone too far, targeted too many. We had the upper hand, and I'd be damned if I didn't use it to crush him into the dirt where he belonged. Jake was backed into a corner, and he knew it. But cornered animals are dangerous. His threats were less forceful, more desperate, as we laid out our plan to expose him, to make him pay for every lie, every manipulation. Was it real, or a final bluff to save his wretched skin? Honestly, I was beyond caring. In that moment, I reveled in seeing the fear in his eyes, a satisfying mirror to my own terror of the past weeks. Once we'd left the scene, however, the adrenaline rush faded. Sarah and I went our separate ways, a silent understanding passing between us. Things weren't so cut and dried anymore. She'd admitted it wasn't her first encounter with Jake. He'd tried to blackmail her before, and she'd paid him off. Her shame was palpable, and it sparked a dark uncertainty in me. Was our alliance really as solid as I desperately needed it to be? Confronting Mark had been its own special kind of hell. Our home, once familiar, now felt like a courtroom. His pain had hardened into a brittle anger, cutting deeper than his initial shock. Neither of us had the energy for a full-blown fight. Instead, a cold, silent distance bloomed between us, filling the spaces where love might have once resided. The question lingered. A toxic cloud. Could this be fixed? Did I want it to be? Each crack in the foundation of my marriage seemed to expose an even deeper fissure inside myself. Had the stability I once craved truly satisfied me? Or had I been lying to myself all along? News of Jake's disappearance came with a mix of relief and lingering unease. The threat was gone, yet it left an echo of trauma in its wake. In the quiet afterwards, with no enemy to fight, my demons took center stage. Sarah reached out, tentative. Her past with Jake. The secrets she'd kept. All of it painted our newfound friendship in complex shades of gray. Yet, we both needed someone who understood this specific kind of mess. Her support was a lifeline, even if it was a frayed one. As for Mark, well, I spent sleepless nights staring at his sleeping form, longing for the simple comfort of the life we'd built. And hating myself for the realization that simple comfort might not be enough anymore. There was a part of myself I'd barely acknowledged, a restlessness I'd stifled for too long. Could I go back to pretending it didn't exist? The future was a terrifying blank canvas. What I craved most wasn't forgiveness or restoration but honesty with myself. I had to confront the uncomfortable truth. Was this mess simply an anomaly fueled by Jake's manipulations, or had it revealed a rot in me, in my life, that had been festering